The more prudent portion, under the general name of Ishmaelites, continued to work in secret, and finally succeeded in placing one of their sect upon the throne. In process of time, they erected a large building, which they called the House of Wisdom, and furnished it with professors, attendants, and books, and mathematical instruments. Men and women were admitted to the enjoyment of these treasures, and scientific and philosophical disputations were held. It was a public institution, but the secret order of the Sophies, under whose patronage it was maintained, had their mysteries, which could only be attained by an initiation extending through 9 degrees. While Sophism has by most writers been believed to be a religio-philosophical sect, von Hammer thinks that it was political, and that its principal object was to overthrow the house of Abbas in favor of the Fatimites, which could only be effected by undermining the national religion. The government at length interfered, and the operations of the society were suspended. But in about a year it resumed its functions and established a new house of wisdom. Extending its influences abroad, many of the disciples of Sophism passed over into Syria about the close of the 10th century, and there established those secret societies which, in the course of the Crusades, came into contact, sometimes on the field of battle, and sometimes in friendly conferences during temporary truces with the Crusaders, but especially with the Knights Templars. The principal of these societies were the Ismaili, or assassins, and the Druses, both of whom have been described. There were other societies in Syria resembling these in doctrine and ceremonies, who, for some especial reasons, not now known, had seceded from the main body, which appears to have been the assassins. Such were the Ansri, who were the followers of that Karmath of whom I have just spoken, who had seceded at an early period from the Sophies in Persia, and had established his sect in Syria on the coast, in the plain of Laodicea, now Laodicea. From them arose another sect called the Nusairiyeh, from the name of their founder, Nusair. They settled to the north of Mount Lebanon, along the low range of mountains extending from Antioch to Tripoli, and from the Mediterranean to Homs, where their descendants, numbering about 200,000 souls, still remain. It is from their frequent communications with these various secret societies, but especially with the assassins, that von Hammer and Higgins, following Ramsay, have supposed that the Templars derived their secret doctrines, and, carrying them to Europe, communicated them to the Freemasons. Rather, I should say that von Hammer and Higgins believed these Syrian societies to be Masonic, and that they taught the principles of the institution to the Templars, who were thus the founders of Freemasonry in Europe. Of such a theory there is not the slightest scintilla of historic evidence. When we come to examine the authentic history of the origin of Freemasonry, it will be seen how such an hypothesis is entirely without support. But that the Templars did have frequent communication with those secret societies, that they acquired a knowledge of their doctrines, and were considerably influenced in the lives of many of their members, and perhaps in secret modifications of their order, is an hypothesis that cannot be altogether denied or doubted, since there are abundant evidences in history of such communications, and since we must admit the plausibility of the theory that the knights were to some extent impressed with profound doctrines of sophism as practiced by these sects. Admitting, then, that the Templars derived some philosophical ideas more liberal than their own from these Syrian secret philosophers, who were more learned than themselves, the next question will be as to what influences the Templars exerted upon the people of Europe on their return, and in what direction and to what ends this influence was exerted, and to this we must now direct our attention. But before entering upon this subject, we may as well notice one significant fact. Of the three orders of knighthood who displayed their prowess in Palestine and Syria during the 2 centuries of the Crusades, Hospitallers, the Teutonic Knights, and the Templars, it is admitted that the Templars were more intimately acquainted with the Ishmaeli, or assassins, than either of the others. It is also known that while the admission to membership in the Hospitaller and Teutonic orders was open and public, the Templars alone had a secret initiation and held their meetings in houses guarded from profane intrusion. Now, at what time the Templars adopted this secret formula of initiation is not known. The rule provided for their government by St. Bernard at the period of their organization makes no allusion to it, and it is probable that there was no such secret initiation practiced for many years after their establishment as an order. Now, this question naturally suggests itself. Did the Templars borrow the idea, and in part, the form of their initiation, from the assassins, among whom such a system existed, or, having obtained it from some other source, was it subjected at a later period of their career, but long before they left Palestine, to certain modifications derived from their intercourse with the secret societies of Syria? This is a question that cannot be historically solved. We must rest for any answer on mere conjecture. And yet, the facts of the Templars being of the three orders the only secret one, and of their intercourse with the assassins, who were also a secret order, are very significant. Some light may be thrown upon this subject by a consideration of the charges, mainly false, but with certain elements of truth, which were urged against the order at the time of its suppression. Let us now proceed to an investigation of the theory that makes the Templars the founders of the Order of Freemasonry after the return of the Knights to Europe. Rejecting this theory as wholly untenable, it will, however, be necessary to inquire what were the real influences exerted upon Europe by the Knights. It must be remembered that if any influence at all was exercised upon the people of Europe, the greater portion must be attributed to the Templars. Of the three orders, Hospitallers, when they left Palestine, repaired directly to the island of Rhodes, where they remained for 200 years, and then, removing to Malta, continued in that island until the decadence of their order at the close of the last century. The Teutonic Knights betook themselves to the uncivilized parts of Germany and renewed their warlike vocation by crusades against the heathens of that country. The Templars alone distributed themselves in the different kingdoms and cities of the continent and became familiar with the people who lived around their preceptories. They alone came in contact with the inhabitants, and they alone could have exercised any influence upon the popular mind or taste. It has been a generally received opinion of the most able architects that the Templars exerted a healthy influence upon the architecture of the Middle Ages. Thus, Sir Christopher Wren says that the Holy Wars gave the Christians who had been there an idea of the Saracens' works, which were afterward imitated by them in their churches, and they refined upon it every day as they proceeded in building. Footnote: Wren's Parentalia. But the most positive opinion of the influence of the Crusaders upon the architecture of Europe was given in 1836 by Mr. Westmacott, a distinguished artist of England. In the course of a series of lectures before the Royal Academy, he thus spoke of the causes of the revival of the arts.